My rich parents left me everything. My son, who abandoned me 10 years ago, suddenly showed up. For 10 years, I prayed for my son to come back. I rehearsed the words I would say, imagined the embrace we would share. But when he finally walked through that door, in the moment I inherited everything, the look in his eyes made me wish he had stayed a ghost forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The air in Mr. Abernathy's office was thick with the scent of old money, mahogany, aged paper, and a faint, cloying hint of lemon polish. It was a smell I'd known my entire life, the smell of contracts signed and fortunes secured. Today, it smelled like a tomb. The heavy damask curtains were drawn against the late autumn chill, casting the room in a permanent, somber twilight. Light from a single brass lamp pooled on the vast, polished surface of the desk, illuminating the final page of my father's last will and testament. Mr. Abernathy, a man whose face seemed composed entirely of weary, overlapping folds of skin, cleared his throat. The sound was like gravel stirring. "And so," he read, his voice a dry rustle, "to my only daughter, Margaret Rowan, I leave the estate in full, with all assets, properties, and holdings therein." He looked up at me over the rim of his spectacles. I felt nothing. Not joy, not even relief. Just the crushing weight of finality. The estate was now mine. The house, the stocks, the collection of antiquities my father had spent a lifetime acquiring, $10 million on paper, and a lifetime of secrets in the walls. I managed a tight, controlled nod, trying to breathe past the knot of grief and responsibility tightening in my chest. My friend Clara, sitting beside me, gave my hand a gentle squeeze. Her presence was a small, solid anchor in the swirling silence. And then the silence shattered. The heavy oak door to the conference room flew open with a violent bang, striking the wall with a crack that made us all jump. A figure stood silhouetted against the brighter light of the hallway. He was taller than I remembered, broader in the shoulders. The boyish softness was gone, replaced by the sharp, lean lines of a man who had lived a hard life. He took a step into the room, and the light caught his face. My breath caught in my throat. It was him. 10 years had passed since I'd last seen him, since that terrible, rain-lashed night. His dark hair was shorter now, and there were lines around his eyes I didn't recognize. But the eyes themselves, they were the same, yet terrifyingly different. The warmth, the idealism I remembered, had been burned away, leaving behind something cold, hard, and calculating. He didn't look at Mr. Abernathy. He didn't look at Clara. His gaze locked onto mine, and a slow, mocking smile spread across his lips. It was a predator's smile. He broke the suffocating silence, his voice deeper than I remembered, laced with an irony that cut like glass. "So, you're the millionaire now, Mother." The words hit me with physical force. This wasn't the reunion I had spent a decade praying for. This wasn't my lost son coming home. This was a stranger wearing his face. The chill that ran down my spine had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. It was the cold, terrifying certainty that the ghost of my past had not just returned to haunt me. It had returned to collect a debt. And looking into the abyss of my son's eyes, I knew the price would be everything. The first morning light was a pale, watery gray, filtering through the tall Georgian windows of my father's bedroom. I'd slept there last night, foolishly thinking that being surrounded by his things would bring some comfort. Instead, I'd tossed and turned, the unfamiliar silence of the house pressing in on me. It was a silence that felt heavier than sound, a void left by 2 lifetimes that had suddenly ended. I rose before dawn, wrapping myself in a thick cashmere robe. The old floorboards were cold beneath my bare feet as I began to wander, a ghost in my own home. The house had always been a symbol of permanence, of security. Now, it felt like a museum, each room a curated exhibit of a life that was no longer mine. In the grand sitting room, the morning sun cut through the dusty air, illuminating the ornate furniture and the portraits of my ancestors on the wall. Their painted eyes seemed to follow me, their expressions stern and proprietary. They weren't family, they were wardens. My fingers trailed over the cool, smooth surface of a marble bust my father had bought in Italy. I paused in front of the glass cabinet holding my mother's collection of porcelain birds, each one perfect and fragile. Everything in this house was bought, collected, and preserved with meticulous care. But as I looked at it all, I didn't feel a sense of pride or ownership. I felt a creeping dread. This wasn't just a collection of beautiful things. It was a fortress. I found myself in my father's study, the heart of the Roman Empire. The scent of his cigar smoke still clung faintly to the leather chairs and heavy drapes. On his massive oak desk, a neat stack of documents sat waiting for me. The final papers from Mr. Abernathy's office. I picked up the top sheet, the paper thick and expensive. The numbers were there in stark black ink. A net worth of over $10 million. A decade ago, that number might have felt like freedom. Now it felt like an anchor, dragging me down into the murky depths of my family's history. Instead of feeling safe, I felt exposed, as if the sheer weight of all this money made me a target. I sank into my father's chair, the leather groaning in protest. Staring at the portfolio summary, a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. I was a young girl, perhaps 10 years old, sitting in this very room. I had come to him crying over some petty schoolyard slight. He had lifted me onto his lap and gestured around the room, at the books, the art, the view of the lake through the window. "Money is a shield, my girl," he had told me, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "It's a wall of stone between us and the world. It protects us from harm, and it protects us from our own past." His words, meant to be reassuring, now sent a shiver of ice through my veins. It protects us from our own past. What past had he been so desperate to keep at bay? A past that involved a man named Cain? A past that had driven my own son away from me? "Andrew." His face superimposed itself over the financial statements, the cold fury in his eyes, the mocking twist of his lips. "So, you're the millionaire now, mother." He hadn't come back for a reconciliation. He had come back because the shield was down. My father was gone, and the inheritance was in play. He was here for the money. And something told me he wasn't the only one. The beautiful, sprawling estate no longer felt like a sanctuary. It was a gilded cage. This inheritance wasn't the blessing my father had intended it to be. It was a burden, a heavy chain forged from secrets and lies. He had built a wall of money to keep the past buried, but the past had a way of climbing walls. And now it was inside. Wearing my son's face, I was the sole heir to a fortune, and I had never felt more alone or more afraid in my entire life. The memory ambushes me when I least expect it. It's the sound of the wind howling around the eaves of the house, a low, mournful cry that sounds just like it did 10 years ago. One moment I'm standing in the quiet library, the next I'm hurled back in time to that night. The night the shield my father had built around us began to crack. The rain was torrential, hammering against the tall library windows in furious, wind-driven sheets. Inside, the only light came from the fire roaring in the hearth, its flames dancing and casting long, distorted shadows that writhed on the book-lined walls. It made the room feel like a cage. Andrew stood across from me, his face pale and tight with a fury I had never seen in him before. He was 28 then, still full of a fierce, youthful idealism that I had once admired and now feared. He slammed a brittle, yellowed file folder onto the polished surface of my father's desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the tense silence. "I found it in the archives," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disillusionment. "In a box buried under old tax records. Kane and Rowan Associates." He spat the name out like something foul. I felt the blood drain from my face. My carefully constructed composure felt as fragile as glass. "Grandfather destroyed them, didn't he, Mother?" Andrew's eyes, so much like my own, bored into me, searching for a truth I had spent my life helping to conceal. "This money, this house, all of it. It's built on the ruins of another man's life. It isn't clean." He wasn't asking. He was accusing. He had found the skeleton in our family's closet. "Let me make it right," he pleaded, his anger giving way to a desperate urgency. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "Give me a portion of the trust. Let me use it to build something new, something honest. We can't just sit on this dirty money and pretend it's a legacy. It's a stain." His words were a physical blow, but it wasn't his judgment that made me freeze. It was fear. A cold, paralyzing fear that the past, the one my father had gone to such lengths to bury, was about to be dug up. All I could see was the catastrophic fallout, the ruin of our name, the end of the life we knew. The shield was about to be breached. I drew myself up, letting that fear harden into a cold, unyielding wall. "You don't understand what you're talking about," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "There are things, histories, that must be left to rest. I forbid you from looking into this any further." The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a profound, shattering disbelief. He stared at me as if I were a stranger. "Forbid me? I'm your son. I'm talking about doing the right thing, and you're talking about letting sleeping dogs lie?" "This is not a debate, Andrew," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "The matter is closed." He let out a choked, bitter laugh. He looked around the library, at the priceless books, the antique furniture, the portraits of our ancestors. His gaze was filled with contempt. "I see," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You'd rather protect these bricks and these lies than trust your own son." He didn't shout. The quiet despair in his voice was so much worse. Before I could find the words, any words, to stop him, he turned on his heel and walked out of the library. I stood frozen, listening to the heavy front door slam shut, a sound that echoed the final closing of a chapter in our lives. I ran to the window just in time to see him, his shoulders hunched against the storm, disappearing into the driving rain and the darkness. I didn't cry out. I didn't run after him. I just stood there, my hand pressed against the cold glass, as tears streamed down my face, hot against my icy skin. The grief was immense, a physical tearing in my chest. But beneath it was the cold, terrifying dread. He hadn't just left me. He had taken our secret with him, out into the world. And in that moment, I knew I hadn't just lost my son. I was about to lose everything. The fire crackled in the hearth, a welcome sound that did little to chase away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. 2 days had passed since Andrew's return. 2 days of walking through the cavernous, silent rooms of the house, feeling his presence like a phantom limb, an ache where something vital used to be. Clara came over that afternoon. She let herself in, as she always did, and found me in the living room, staring into the flames. She didn't say a word, just went about the familiar ritual of making tea. Soon, The gentle clink of porcelain and the scent of Earl Grey filled the space between us. She handed me a cup, her touch warm and steady. For a long time, we sat in silence, watching the fire. Clara was the only person on earth who could sit with my grief without trying to fix it. She had been my rock since we were roommates in college, a brilliant, pragmatic law student who balanced my more emotional nature. "He's back," I finally said, the words feeling brittle and strange in the quiet room. Clara didn't feign surprise. She simply nodded, her gaze soft with concern. "I know, my dear. I was there." "I don't understand, Clara," I whispered, the dam of my composure finally breaking. He looked at me as if he hated me. After 10 years of silence, he walks in as if he's come to claim a prize. There was nothing in his eyes, nothing of the boy I raised. I told her everything. The cold, mocking smile, the way his eyes scanned the room, not with nostalgia, but with appraisal, the single, cutting sentence he had thrown at me like a stone. When I finished, a single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. I didn't bother to wipe it away. Clara set her teacup down with a decisive click. She leaned forward and took both of my hands in hers. Her grip was firm, grounding. "Margaret, listen to me," she said, her voice low and serious. "You are a smart woman, but right now, you are thinking with your heart, not your head. We need to look at this for what it is. Andrew showing up on the very day the will was read? That is not a coincidence. That is a calculated move." I shook my head. "But why?" "To hurt me. He's already done that." "This is bigger than hurt feelings," Clara continued. Her eyes, usually so warm, now held the sharp analytical glint of the professor she once was. "History has a way of repeating itself, Margaret. Especially when there are old debts left unpaid. Think about it. Your father builds an empire that, as we both know, didn't come without a cost. Now, that empire is yours." A cold dread, different from my grief, began to seep into the room. "What are you saying?" Clara's voice dropped even lower, becoming almost a whisper. "I'm saying that when you inherit a fortune of this magnitude, you don't just inherit the assets. You inherit the ghosts that come with it. Andrew didn't just leave because of a fight with you. He left because he found a skeleton in the family closet. Now he's back, and I have a terrible feeling he didn't come back alone." She squeezed my hands. "Be careful, my friend. Be very, very careful of the ghosts from the past." Her words hung in the air, more chilling than the autumn wind rattling the window panes. A ghost. That's what Andrew had felt like. A ghost wearing my son's face. Clara was right. This wasn't a family drama. It was something else entirely. She saw the chessboard, while I had only seen the broken pieces. I felt a surge of gratitude for her, my clear-headed, loyal friend. She was the only person I could trust. I didn't see the flicker of something else in her eyes, a look that was neither worry nor sympathy. It was the cool, detached assessment of a master strategist watching her opponent absorb a crucial piece of information. She had just armed me, but she had also just aimed me. The seed of suspicion was planted, and in the fertile ground of my fear and grief, she knew it would grow. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. A few days later, the weather turned, the biting wind softened, and a weak golden sun broke through the persistent gray clouds. It was one of those beautiful, deceptive late autumn afternoons that feels like a final, fleeting gift before the long winter. Seeking a moment of peace, I took a wool coat and walked out into the gardens. The last of the roses were clinging to their stems, their petals bruised and browning at the edges, but still fragrant. I was standing by the stone bench overlooking the lake when I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me. I didn't need to turn around. I knew it was him. My entire body tensed, bracing for another confrontation. "Mother." Andrew's voice was different. The sharp, ironic edge was gone, replaced by a quiet, almost hesitant tone. I turned slowly. He stood a few feet away, hands shoved into the pockets of his worn jacket. He looked tired, and for the first time since his return, he didn't meet my gaze, focusing instead on the shimmering surface of the lake. I owe you an apology," he began, finally looking at me. The expression in his eyes was one I hadn't seen in a decade. Remorse, or at least a convincing imitation of it. The way I acted at the lawyer's office was inexcusable. I was angry. I've been angry for a long time, and I took it out on you at the worst possible moment. It was cruel, and I'm sorry. I remained silent, my heart a confused, hammering drum in my chest. This was the last thing I expected. He took a step closer. "These past 10 years, I've had a lot of time to think. I was young, arrogant. I thought I had all the answers." He let out a short, self-deprecating laugh. "The world taught me otherwise. I was wrong to dig up things I didn't understand. Wrong to throw our family's history in your face like that." He gestured vaguely toward the grand house behind us, its brick facade glowing in the afternoon sun. "Grandfather worked his entire life to build this, to protect us. I see that now. And with him gone..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "You shouldn't have to bear this burden alone." He looked me straight in the eye, his expression earnest. "I want to come home, Mother, if you'll have me. I want to help you manage the estate, to learn the business. I want to help protect what our family built. It's time for me to bury the hatchet and step up." The words were perfect. They were everything a grieving mother would want to hear from her long-lost son. A part of me, the part that had ached for him for 10 years, desperately wanted to believe him, to throw my arms around him and weep with relief. But Clara's warning echoed in my mind. That is not a coincidence. That is a calculated move. And as he spoke of protecting the family, his gaze drifted past me, over the manicured lawns toward the house. It was just for a second, but I saw it. The look in his eyes wasn't the nostalgia of a son returning home. It was the cool, assessing glance of a surveyor evaluating a property. It was the glint of a predator sizing up its prize. The leopard doesn't change its spots. The sincerity was a performance, a well-rehearsed play designed to lower my defenses. The sweet words were a Trojan horse, and I had no idea what dangers were hidden inside. But if he wanted to play a game, then so would I. I let a slow, weary smile touch my lips. I allowed a flicker of hope, feigned hope, to soften my expression. "Andrew," I said, my voice thick with emotion I didn't entirely feel. I don't know what to say. Of course, you can come home. This will always be your home." I reached out and placed my hand on his arm. His muscles were tense beneath the fabric of his jacket. "We have a lot to talk about," I said softly. "But for now, welcome back." He smiled, a wide, relieved smile that didn't quite reach his cold, calculating eyes. The truce was set. The curtain had just gone up on his little play, and I had just agreed to be his co-star. I would play the part of the forgiving mother, and I would watch his every move, waiting for him to reveal his true endgame. For a week, Andrew played the part of the prodigal son to perfection. He was quiet, respectful, and helpful. He asked intelligent questions about the estate's finances, spent time in the library reading my father's old business journals, and even fixed the rattling shutter on the guest bedroom window. He was a model of contrition, and I, in turn, played the part of the relieved, forgiving mother. We were two actors in a silent, tense play, each waiting for the other to miss a line. The entire house seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on a Tuesday, brought to my door by Clara. I was in my father's study, trying to make sense of a labyrinthine stock portfolio when she arrived. She didn't have a cup of tea in her hand this time. She was carrying a thin manila folder, and the look on her face was grim. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, closing the door quietly behind her. "Never," I said, grateful for the distraction. "What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Perhaps I have," she replied, her voice low. She sat in the leather chair opposite the desk and placed the folder between us. "I was worried after our last talk, so I took the liberty of making a call. A friend of mine, a very discreet private investigator." My blood ran cold. "You had Andrew followed?" "I had his last 10 years investigated," she corrected gently. "Margaret, if you're going to play this game with him, you need to know who you're playing against. You can't go into this blind." My first instinct was to be angry, to feel betrayed. But she was right. I was fumbling in the dark, and my maternal instincts were a liability I couldn't afford. I nodded slowly, my eyes fixed on the folder. "What did you find?" Clara pushed it across the desk. "It's not a pretty picture. He's been living on the edge, failed business ventures, a lot of moving around. But the real trouble started about a year ago. He's in debt, Margaret. Serious debt." I opened the folder. The first page was a summary. My eyes scanned the lines of text, my heart sinking with each word. The numbers were staggering. A debt of nearly $200,000. How could he have gotten himself into such a hole? Then I saw the name of the creditor. It wasn't a bank. It was a private investment firm. VK Enterprises. "I've never heard of them," I said, looking up at Clara. "Neither had I," she said, her expression unreadable. "They're a predatory lender, by all accounts. They specialize in high-risk loans and hostile takeovers. Your investigator had to dig deep to find out who's behind it. The man who runs the company is notoriously private." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "His name is Victor Kane." The name hit me like a physical blow. Kane, a name from a buried past, a name my son had thrown at me in anger a decade ago. I stared at Clara, my mind racing, trying to connect the dots. Clara watched me, her head tilted slightly. She delivered the final, devastating blow with the practiced ease of a surgeon making a precise incision. "Kane," she said, her voice a thoughtful murmur. "That name rings a bell. It's funny. I seem to recall your father having an old business partner with that name. Way back when. Arthur Kane, wasn't it?" And just like that, the entire horrifying picture snapped into focus. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just Andrew's bad luck or poor judgment. This was a trap, a meticulously crafted long-game revenge plot. Victor Kane. He had to be Arthur's son. He had ensnared my son, saddled him with an impossible debt, and sent him back home at the perfect moment, right when the inheritance was settled. Andrew wasn't the predator I had feared. He was the bait. He was a pawn in a much larger game, a weapon aimed directly at the heart of the Rowan family. The fear I had been living with for the past week didn't vanish. It crystallized. It turned from a hot, panicked emotion into something cold, hard, and heavy in my gut. It turned into rage, a cold fury, clear and sharp as a shard of ice. I was no longer just a grieving mother dealing with a wayward son. I was the guardian of a legacy under siege, facing an enemy born from my father's sins, and I would not let him win. The rage that had settled in my gut was a strange and unfamiliar thing. It wasn't hot and explosive. It was a cold, dense weight that sharpened my senses and cleared my mind. The grief and fear were still there, but they were now packed in ice, relegated to a place where they couldn't cloud my judgment. My father had built a fortress of money to protect us, and now that fortress was under siege. The enemy was at the gates, and he was using my son as a battering ram. I knew I couldn't outmaneuver a man like Victor Kane in his world of hostile finance. I needed a different kind of weapon, one forged in the world my father understood: secrets and leverage. My father was a brilliant, meticulous, and deeply paranoid man. He never entered a deal without an escape hatch, never faced an enemy without a hidden card up his sleeve. He would have anticipated this. He would have prepared for a day when the ghosts of his past came calling. He would have left me something. My search began in his study, but ended in the one place in the house I had always avoided: the third-floor archives. It was a long, narrow room, packed to the ceiling with filing cabinets and stacked cardboard boxes, a dusty, climate-controlled tomb for the Rowan family's history. The air was stale, thick with the smell of decaying paper and forgotten things. For hours, I worked under the stark light of a single bare bulb, pulling down heavy boxes, my hands growing grimy with dust. I sifted through decades of old tax returns, defunct business proposals, and personal correspondence, a paper trail of a life lived with painstaking precision. I was about to give up, the cold rage beginning to flicker with frustration, when I saw it. Tucked away on a high shelf, almost hidden behind a set of architectural blueprints, was a simple wooden footlocker bearing my father's initials in faded gold leaf. It wasn't locked. Inside, nestled among his university diplomas and his military service medals, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front in his familiar, decisive script. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of his personal stationery, the words written in fountain pen. The letter was dated just 6 months before his death. My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the wolves are circling. Do not mourn me. Mourn the time we did not have. I am writing this because I know your heart, and I know your conscience. I know you have always felt the weight of what happened with Arthur Kane. Do not carry that burden. It is mine and mine alone. I did what I had to do to give you the life you deserved. It was my cruel choice to make, and I would make it again to protect you. But I am not a fool. The sins of the father are often visited upon the children. A man like Arthur Kane raises a son to remember, not to forgive. I have seen to it that our legacy is protected. The will is more than a document of inheritance. It is the final shield of this family. I have instructed Abernathy on a specific contingency clause, a provision that will protect the estate from any and all forms of coercion or duress. Do not let anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, convince you to break it. Do not let them dig up what I have buried. This shield is your weapon. Use it without sentiment. It is my last gift to you, your loving father. I read the letter twice, then a third time. The words were a chilling echo from the grave. My father's voice, pragmatic and ruthless to the very end. He had seen this day coming. He had known. A wave of something that felt like gratitude, but colder and sharper, washed over me. He had left me a weapon. But as I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope, I felt the crushing weight of his legacy settle upon me more heavily than ever. This shield he had given me was also a cage. The will wasn't just designed to protect me. It was designed to protect the original lie, to keep the past buried forever. To use it, I would have to become like him, choosing the cold, hard logic of preservation over the messy truth. He had not freed me. He had shackled me to his secrets, forcing me to become the final guardian of the wall he had built. Knowledge is a weapon, but it is a heavy one to carry. Armed with the investigator's report and my father's chilling letter, I was no longer a passive victim. I was a combatant. The report had given me more than just Victor Kane's name. It had given me Andrew's predictable patterns. I knew he was meeting someone in the city that evening. I knew the time and the place. And so, I drove into Manhattan, a city I now saw not as a hub of culture and commerce, but as the enemy's seat of power. The bar was exactly the kind of place I expected. The name was discreet, the entrance unassuming. Inside, it was a world of dark wood, burnished leather, and lighting so low it felt conspiratorial. The air hummed with the quiet, confident murmur of men making deals worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. I chose a small table in a shadowed alcove, a place where I could see the entrance without being easily seen. I ordered a glass of seltzer water, the ice clinking against the glass the only sound in my immediate vicinity. My heart hammered a steady, cold rhythm against my ribs. Andrew arrived first. He looked out of place, his worn jacket and anxious energy a stark contrast to the bespoke suits and relaxed power of the other patrons. He scanned the room nervously before taking a seat at a small table in the center, his back to me. 5 minutes later, Victor Kane walked in. He was nothing like the brutish villain I had imagined. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark tailored suit, with a stillness about him that was immediately commanding. He moved with an easy, predatory grace. He wasn't loud or flashy. He was the opposite. He was a man who had no need to announce his power because it radiated from him like a physical force. He spotted Andrew and moved toward the table, his expression unreadable. I was too far away to hear every word, but I didn't need to. I could read the story in their body language. Andrew, tense and deferential. Victor, relaxed, in complete control, leaning back in his chair as if he owned the very air in the room. I strained, focusing all my attention, catching snippets of their conversation over the low thrum of the bar. Then, Victor leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous pitch that somehow carried across the room. The ambient noise seemed to fade away, and his words reached me with perfect, horrifying clarity. "Let's cut to the chase," Victor said, his voice calm, almost conversational. "Your grandfather owed my father a fortune. You owe me a considerable amount of money, and your entire family owes mine an apology, written in blood and paid in full." He paused, letting the words hang in the air between them. "Your mother will settle all of these accounts. She will sign over what is required. You just have to convince her. You have 1 month." My hand tightened around my water glass, the cold seeping into my skin. My knuckles turned white, and for a terrifying second, I thought the glass might shatter in my grip. This wasn't a negotiation over a debt. It was a verdict. A sentence being handed down. Victor Kane wasn't just a creditor. He was an executioner, here to collect on a generational sin. The carefully constructed wall of cold rage I had built around my heart began to crumble, and the fear I'd been holding at bay came rushing back in, colder and more potent than before. The pain of my son's betrayal was a dull ache compared to this sharp, visceral terror. This wasn't just about losing the money. It was about the complete and utter destruction of the Rowan name. It was about being erased, our legacy rewritten as a cautionary tale of hubris and ruin. My father's shield felt like a piece of paper against a tidal wave. I was facing the living embodiment of his past, and I was utterly, terrifyingly outmatched. The meeting was set for 10 o'clock in the morning, back in the same suffocatingly formal conference room where this nightmare began. Mr. Abernathy's office. This time, however, I was not a grieving daughter. I was a queen defending her territory. I walked in with my head held high, my father's letter a talisman in my briefcase, and his cold resolve a shield around my heart. They were already there. Andrew sat stiffly on one side of the long mahogany table, his eyes avoiding mine. He looked pale and haggard, a man caught in a trap of his own making. Across from him sat Victor Kane. In the stark morning light, he looked even more formidable. He was the picture of corporate power, exuding an aura of absolute, unshakable confidence. He gave me a thin, predatory smile as I took my seat at the head of the table. The king had arrived to claim his spoils. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat nervously, shuffling a stack of papers. "As we are all here," he began, "Mr. Kane has a proposal to resolve the outstanding financial obligations of Mr. Andrew Rowan." Victor held up a hand, silencing the lawyer without effort. "Let's dispense with the formalities, shall we? This isn't a proposal. It's a settlement." He slid a sheaf of documents across the polished table toward me. "It's quite simple, Mrs. Rowan. Your son owes my company a significant sum. To avoid further unpleasantness, you will sign over a 30% stake in the Rowan Estate's primary holding company. The debt will be considered paid in full. We can all walk away." He leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. The arrogance was breathtaking. He wasn't just collecting a debt. He was carving up my family's legacy as if it were his for the taking. Andrew stared at the table, shamefaced. I didn't look at the papers. Instead, I opened my briefcase and took out a single document, a copy of my father's will. I placed it on the table with a quiet thud that seemed to echo in the silent room. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," I said, my voice even and calm. I met Victor's gaze without flinching. My father was a very cautious man. He planned for every eventuality. Allow me to read from Article 4, Section B, the contingency clause. I flattened the paper and began to read, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me. In the event that the primary heir, Margaret Rowan, is subjected to coercion, duress, or any form of threat intended to force the liquidation or transfer of estate assets against her free will, all major holdings shall be immediately placed into a protective trust. The assets will be frozen, managed solely by the executor, and rendered non-transferable for a period of no less than 5 years. I looked up. "The executor," I added, giving Mr. Abernathy a pointed look, "is bound by fiduciary duty to enact this clause if he has any reason to suspect foul play. And I assure you both, he has every reason." The color drained from Andrew's face. He looked at me, utterly stunned, as if I had just revealed a secret weapon he never knew existed. He was completely out of his depth. Victor Kane, however, did not look stunned. He looked amused. A slow, cold smile spread across his face once more. He chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "A clever bit of legal maneuvering from beyond the grave. I'm impressed," he said. "But you're making a grave miscalculation." He leaned forward, his smile vanishing, his eyes turning to chips of ice. "You think that piece of paper can stop me? You think a trust can protect you from what I'm capable of? I don't play by your rules, Mrs. Rowan." The air crackled with menace. He held all the power, and we both knew it. My legal shield was a bluff, and he had just called it. And then, the conference room door opened. Clara Yates walked in, her expression calm and resolute. She carried a thick accordion file, bulging with documents. She didn't look at me or Andrew. Her eyes were fixed on Victor Kane. She walked to the table and placed the file in the center with a heavy, definitive thud. It sat there between us all, a bomb waiting to detonate. "I think," Clara said, her voice cutting through the tension with the precision of a scalpel, "that we should all know the entire truth before anyone does something they will undoubtedly regret. All eyes were on the file. It sat in the middle of the mahogany table like an unexploded ordnance, radiating a quiet, immense power that dwarfed every other document in the room. The tension was so thick I could feel it pressing on my skin. Victor Kane, for the first time, looked uncertain. His cold confidence had been replaced by a wary, guarded expression. He was a predator who had just realized he might have walked into a trap. Clara didn't wait for an invitation. She opened the file, her movements deliberate and calm. She wasn't the warm, comforting friend I knew. She was the sharp, formidable law professor in complete command of her classroom. 40 years ago, she began, her voice clear and steady. I was a junior associate at the law firm that represented Rowan Industries. I was young, ambitious, and I was assigned to help a senior partner with a major corporate restructuring. The partner was my mentor. The company was on the verge of collapse due to a sudden market crash, and the two men at the head of that company were the best of friends. Your father, Margaret, and yours, Victor. She looked from me to Victor, her gaze unflinching. I was the one who drew up the paperwork. I was the one who notarized the signatures. I saw the whole thing, from start to finish. She paused, letting the weight of her confession settle. My own history, a story I thought I knew, was being rewritten before my eyes. This wasn't a malicious backstabbing, Victor, she said, her voice softening with a hint of old sorrow. It wasn't a greedy plot to steal a company. It was a tragedy. The company was bleeding money. They had 1 week to secure a massive line of credit, or they would lose everything. The bank would only extend the loan to a single majority stakeholder. They had to choose. One man would walk away with nothing, and the other would save the company and the jobs of 200 employees. Your father, Margaret, made an impossible choice. He sacrificed his best friend to save the ship from sinking. He lived with that guilt every single day of his life. The room was utterly silent. Victor stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. The simple, clean narrative of betrayal and revenge he had built his entire life upon was being systematically dismantled. Then Clara turned her attention to him, and her tone became sharp as steel once more. She pulled a second set of documents from the file. And that brings us to the present day, she said. To this debt. She slid the papers across the table to Victor. 5 years ago, VK Enterprises initiated a hostile takeover of Nelson Manufacturing, a small, family-run company in Ohio. You used falsified debt instruments to leverage them into a corner, planning to strip the company for its assets. It was a classic vulture capital play, but it failed. Someone tipped off the Nelsons, gave them copies of your internal memos, and they were able to get a court injunction just in time. She looked from Victor's stunned face to my son, who was now staring at the table as if he wished it would swallow him whole. The person who sent them that information, who blew the whistle on your entire scheme, was Andrew, Clara stated, her voice ringing with finality. That's the real reason he owes you money, isn't it, Victor? This isn't a loan. This is payback. You couldn't sue him without exposing your own dirty laundry, so you trapped him in a debt he could never repay, all so you could use him to get to his mother. I looked at Andrew, my son, the boy I had accused of greed, of betrayal, of being a pawn. My heart didn't just break. It shattered into a million pieces. The last 10 years of misunderstanding and bitterness coalesced into a single searing point of pain. He hadn't come back to take from me. He had been dragged back, a prisoner of his own conscience. He had tried to do the right thing, to stop a predator, and it had cost him everything. He had been fighting a war I never even knew existed, and I had condemned him for it. The drive home from the city was silent. Andrew sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the blur of highway lights, a stranger I had only just met. The revelations in Mr. Abernathy's office had shattered the foundations of our family, but in the rubble, something new and terrifyingly fragile was exposed. The truth. We didn't speak when we entered the house. The weight of 10 years of unspoken words, of anger and misunderstanding, was a physical presence between us. He went to the living room and stood by the large window overlooking the lake, his shoulders slumped. I followed, but kept my distance, the space between us a chasm of regret. For a long time, the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, marking the passage of moments we could never get back. The first pale light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the dark water in shades of gray and lavender. A new day was beginning, whether we were ready for it or not. I looked at my son, at the man he had become. A man who had tried to do the right thing and had been punished for it, not just by his enemy, but by his own mother. An apology felt like a hollow, inadequate gesture. Words couldn't mend the wound I had inflicted. Only actions could. My resolve hardened. I walked over to the antique secretary desk, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I picked up the telephone. Andrew turned from the window, his expression wary and confused as I dialed the number for Mr. Abernathy's home. I knew he was an early riser. The lawyer answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Abernathy." "It's Margaret Rowan," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I apologize for the early hour, but this cannot wait. I want you to begin the process of liquidating 30% of the estate's liquid assets." I could hear him sputtering on the other end of the line. "Margaret? 30%? After what happened yesterday, are you sure? The trust." "The trust was a shield for a war that is now over," I interrupted, my eyes locked on Andrew's. "The terms have changed. I want you to use that capital to establish a new charitable foundation, an investment fund for ethical startups and entrepreneurs." "A foundation?" Abernathy asked, his confusion mounting. "Yes," I said. "It will be called the Rowan Kane Fund." Andrew flinched as if I had struck him. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, a look of profound, staggering disbelief on his face. "I'll be in your office at 9 o'clock in the morning to sign the preliminary paperwork," I finished, and hung up the phone before he could argue further. I turned to face my son fully. The morning light was stronger now, illuminating the exhaustion and the faint, flickering hope in his eyes. "I can't take back the last 10 years, Andrew," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I can't apologize for a blindness I chose not to see. Words are meaningless now." I gestured toward the phone. "That is my apology. That is my attempt to make things right. My father built a legacy on a painful secret. It's time we built a new one." I walked closer to him, stopping just a few feet away. "This is a chance for you to build something again. The right way, the way you always wanted to. A clean legacy. I'm not giving you a handout. I'm giving you a responsibility. The fund will need a director, someone with a strong moral compass, someone who knows how to spot a predator." Tears welled in his eyes, the first genuine emotion I had seen since his return. He didn't try to hide them. He just stood there, letting them fall. This wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. It was something far more valuable. It was a recognition. It was a second chance. The chasm between us was still there, deep and wide, but for the first time in a decade, we were looking at each other from across the divide, and I had just laid down the first plank of a bridge. 6 months can make a world of difference. The late autumn chill that had seemed to permanently settle over the estate had given way to a bright, warm spring. The skeletal trees were now lush with green leaves, and the gardens, which had been dormant and gray, were bursting with the vibrant colors of tulips and daffodils. The house no longer felt like a tomb, but a home. We were on the stone terrace overlooking the lake, the late morning sun warming our faces. A gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and damp earth. Between Andrew and me, spread across a wrought iron table, were the business plans for the fund's first major investment, a clean energy startup founded by a brilliant young woman from a low-income background. Her projections are ambitious, Andrew said, tapping a finger on a spreadsheet. But the technology is sound. I've seen the prototype. If we give her the seed money, she could actually pull this off. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the man he was always meant to be. The passion for building something good, something clean, was back in his eyes. The hard, cynical shell he had worn was gone, replaced by a focused, quiet confidence. Our conversations were still careful, like two people learning a new language. The scars of the last decade hadn't vanished, but they were no longer open wounds. We were building a bridge, one conversation, one shared project at a time. Clara sat nearby in a wicker chair, a half-finished glass of iced tea on the table beside her. She wasn't reading or participating in the discussion. She was simply watching us, a small, serene smile on her face. Her part in the play was over. The master strategist had won, and her prize was seeing her friend's family slowly, painstakingly, stitch itself back together. As Andrew explained the technical specifications, my gaze drifted toward the long, winding driveway. A sleek black car I didn't recognize was pulling up to the front gates. It stopped just outside, the engine a low, powerful hum. The driver's side window was tinted, but I knew who was in there. My breath caught, and for a second, the old, cold fear returned. Andrew followed my gaze and fell silent. The car just sat there for a long moment. We couldn't see the driver, but we could feel his presence, an echo of the storm that had almost destroyed us. He wasn't there to threaten us. He was there to see. From our vantage point on the terrace, we could see the new, discreet bronze plaque that had been installed on the stone gatepost. It read, simply, "The Rowan Kane Fund." It was a statement, not of victory or defeat, but of a new, shared history. It was an acknowledgement of a debt that could never be repaid with money, only with a better future. The car idled for what felt like an eternity. Then, we saw the driver's head turn slightly, as if taking in the sign, the house, the peaceful scene on the terrace. There was a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acceptance. Then, the car smoothly executed a three-point turn and drove away, disappearing down the tree-lined road until it was gone. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The ghost had been laid to rest. The hatchet was well and truly buried. I turned my gaze back to the lake, its surface sparkling under the morning sun. I had lost nearly a third of my inheritance. The number on my financial statements was significantly smaller than it had been 6 months ago. But as I sat there, listening to my son passionately describe a future built on innovation instead of acquisition, I had never felt richer. My father had left me a shield. But a shield is a heavy thing, meant for a life of constant defense. Andrew, Clara, and even Victor Kane, in his own way, had forced me to put it down. And in doing so, I had found something far more valuable. I had lost a fortune, but I had saved my son. I had healed the past not by burying it deeper, but by bringing it into the light. I had created a new legacy, one not built on money or secrets, but on truth and redemption. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely free. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0 so we know and can improve future videos. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.